Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have with me Steve Reiter. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Kimberly, how you doing?
I am good. Happy to have you on here,
Thank
and
you.
I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. So,
Thank
but
you.
just so people know you, I'm going to go ahead and just read a short bio about you. So, Steve Reiter is a 27 plus year broadcasting veteran with a career spanning internationally syndicated programs like Focus on the Family, where he led the production team during the 2008 National Radio Hall of Fame induction, and Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk, where he was instrumental in the largest rollout in radio history. Co founder of the Eternal Leadership Podcast, recognized by Inc. magazine and Feedspot for its leadership insights. Steve brings innovation and strategic thinking to the podcasting space. Following the tragic loss of his wife during forced hospital isolation in 2020, Steve founded the Never Alone Project, a nonprofit advocating for patient rights so that at least one visitor per day. The project aims to codify this vital support into national law. All right. Well, Steve, sounds like you have had a full story. So just start wherever you want and tell us about you.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in southern Wisconsin, 30 miles straight north of Madison. Really small town called Partyville. And it's Pardeeville, D-E-E. Every time I would order something when I was in high school or college, Partyville, awesome, man. And yeah, by just number of circumstances, I ended up out here in Colorado right after I graduated high school. I was dating a girl, her parents lived here. Mom and dad gave me a airfare to go meet the family and fell in love with the town and figured, what the heck? I got nothing tying me in Wisconsin. And 6 weeks after I moved here, she was back at school, met another guy, and dumped me.
Oh,
And I can tell you right now, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it really allowed me to really be built from the ground up because working at Focus on the Family, I would listen to the and working in the broadcasting division, I would listen to these broadcasts and I would just be soaking in. I was getting a PhD level marriage and family and parenting and all of that. And so when I did meet Elizabeth in what was it, early October of 2000, I was in a much different position than when I moved here in August of 97. And so, yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, we were living our life, and the day that we found out that she was pregnant, she also got diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And the rheumatologist told Elizabeth at that appointment, I wasn't there for that one. He was like, "Yeah, we recommend an abortion because this type of lupus, it's going to be very dangerous for you. You have an anti-cardiophospholipid antibody, if I remember correctly. It's been a while." And sure enough, it played out exactly the way that the doctor said it would. Pregnancy-induced hypertension, lots of bed rest, numerous ER visits because her blood pressure was through the roof. And it was late October where they just couldn't get it under control. So they hospitalized her. And it, after I want to say it was about a week, she was in there for probably a week, maybe less. And October 30th, 2004, she started to bleed, a little bit of bleeding here and there. Nurses weren't too worried about it until they came in at about 9 o'clock and did an ultrasound and got Matthew's heartbeat. And they couldn't find it. Then they quickly realized, oh, the bleeding, his the placenta's abrupting and his heart rate is slowed down. We need to do an emergency C-section now. Well, because she had been on blood thinners, it was quick and it was fast. And when they pulled Matthew, in fact, I didn't even have time to scrub in. I was watching them pull my son out. They put Elizabeth under, and I was watching them pull my son out. and wheel him past me from the scrub-in room. And so I went with Matthew, and I was coaching high school football at the time as kind of a part-time after work kind of thing. And my head coach's wife, who was ended up becoming one of Elizabeth's closest friends, she was stayed with Elizabeth and was with Elizabeth when she woke up. And when Elizabeth woke up, first off, I should say, the doctor came to me in the NICU and he said, Steve, it got really hairy in there. She lost a lot of blood. Oh, all right. All right. Then Elizabeth woke up and she told Tracy, I'm not supposed to be here. That was like a massive shock because, I mean, first off, I thought I was losing my son when they couldn't find his heartbeat. And now my wife says she's not supposed to be here after the doctor told me it got really hairy in there. She lost a lot of blood. So that's really kind of planted the seed that this could be my journey. And so whenever we would work on broadcasts about you know, grief, loss, losing a spouse, there was something in my spirit that just kind of put the antennas up a little bit more. And I listened a little bit extra to try and, okay, if this does happen to me, all right. Well, a couple nights later, Elizabeth started complaining of chest pain. And for years, the doctor said, that's just the lupus, that's just the lupus, that's just the lupus. Fast forward to 2014, Elizabeth ended up having this massive lupus flare up where 10 years ago, next month in February, we're recording this thing in January. I'm not sure when it's airing, but she ended up being hospitalized because she had wasted away essentially. She was 5'6". She wasted away to 85 pounds. Lupus flare up that they were misdiagnosing. We think it's hormonal. We think it's this. We think it's that. Finally, she just went up to University of Colorado Hospital, the Anschutz campus in Aurora on the east side of Denver. And the doctors were like, yeah, let's just treat it like lupus and see what happens. Boom. Within 2 hours, 3 hours maybe, she was getting up by herself, going to the bathroom by herself, which is something she hadn't done in weeks. I would have to put on her socks. I'd have to help get her dressed. I'd have to help, get her out of bed, help her if she was stepping into the shower, those kinds of things. She was just really wasting away. Well, she got better from that lupus flare-up so quickly that chest pain that she complained about after Matthew flared. And it didn't flare in terms of pain, but what was going on underneath was really starting to just exacerbate because of the amount of weight that she put back on in such a fast amount of time. And so it was in November of 2014, she ended up being hospitalized. I noticed like in August or in September, she'd get up from here in the bedroom and she'd walk into the living room and she'd be out of breath. And I'm like, there's something wrong here. You need to get that looked at. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm fine. Well, she finally drove herself to the hospital because she was feeling so weak. And immediately, as soon as they put the heart stuff on her, started measuring, immediately they were like, we're getting you into our room. And it was within no time that they diagnosed her with pulmonary hypertension. And essentially for listeners that don't know, pulmonary hypertension is where the blood is being pushed from your heart into your lungs to get oxygenated. And your lungs aren't accepting the amount of blood that the heart is trying to push in. And so that back pressure causes the right side of your heart to enlarge and eventually fail. And when Elizabeth went in, she had congestive heart failure. The doctor, her doctor, ended up becoming her pulmonary doctor. He came to me and he was like, Steve, when she came in, this is really an end of life kind of situation. So he was kind of preparing me that, hey, she might not make it home. And then the head of pulmonology came to me the next day and he said, Steve, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but there's a real possibility your wife isn't going to be around to see your youngest graduate high school. Caleb was 8 at the time. He was essentially saying, hey, in the next 10 years, she could be gone. And he went on to explain there's really 2 main reasons. One, there's no cure. And so the best other than a lung transplant, which is fraught with complications. So there's no cure, and the best medicines we have, eventually they stop working. And it's just a slow congestive heart failure just taking over. And two, because she would now have a Hickman line going into her chest, they would be pumping in meds 24/7, which then presented an infection risk. And he said, Steve, usually PH patients have 1 to 2 infections a year. Well, in the 5.5 years, I did such a good job of cleaning that. She only had 2 infections in that 5.5 years. Why? Because I would pray over it. I'd pray over her. I'd speak words of life over her. I'd just do those kinds of things that I knew would lift her spirits, because all those hospital stays, whether it was Matthew, whether it was a pneumonia scare, whether it was the lupus flare up, the pulmonary hypertension, a number of other hospital stays. She had another lupus flare up, I think, when she was pregnant with Caleb. I'd be in there 24/7. I'd be in there 2 or 3 days, and her mom would be in there 1 or 2. And we do this rotation, and we kind of bring the boys in and encourage her, and we'd speak words of life over her. And I saw how quickly she would rebound by doing so. And so that's exactly what we did when she was in there with that PH. She was in there for 3 weeks. In 2014, she was in the hospital for a total of 5 weeks. 2 weeks in February, and then 5 weeks in November and December. Ended up spending Thanksgiving there at the hospital, brought in a bunch of games, played games with the boys. The food in the hospital actually wasn't too bad for Thanksgiving. They actually did a pretty good job. So we made the best of it, and we had fun. And it's something that I will always look back at. Hey, we just made the best of the situation, and we had fun with it. So she gets out of the hospital. She now has a Hickman line going into her chest. She has all these new meds that she's got to be taking. And we invite a ton of people. I invited, I don't know how many hundred friends over to kind of pray over the house, pray over the land. And within 1 month, I mean, this is one of the crazy things, that no one prayed for Caleb. No one laid hands on Caleb. No one prayed for him whatsoever. The kid was having warts all over his hand, little plantar warts all over his hands, like along his thumbs and stuff. Within 2 days, they were gone. Whoa. All right. So Elizabeth rebounded so quickly from that end of life situation that her doctor was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about taking that Hickman line out." And Elizabeth was like, "Hold on, time out. I don't want to go through the surgery of having to do this again. So let's just see what else we can do. Titrate the medicine down, increase some other medicines, oral medication, try that." And yeah, over those 5 years, we saw titrating up, titrating up, titrating up. Well, when COVID happened, I was in Wisconsin for the boys basketball tournament. I grew up in Wisconsin, as I said. One of my college roommates, undefeated team, number 1 seed in Division 7, I believe, 6. So smaller school. But I mean, this is a team that 10 years prior, he told me, CB, my nickname was Cool Beans. They call me Cool Beans. They call me CB to this day. He said, CB, I think I can win state with this team. If I have any chance, this is the team. And sure enough, they were undefeated, number 1 seed. I was there to support him, and I was going to watch him through the sectionals or was it regionals? One or the other, the one right before state and then state. So I was out there. And then the whole shutdown happened. And on that day, the day after the NCAA canceled their tournament and the NBA paused their season, right before the official lockdown, Elizabeth called and said, "I'm sick. I think it might be COVID," because Marissa, a friend of hers, also has it. Marissa's husband worked for the Department of Defense, did a lot of traveling. And so it just seemed that it could be COVID. So I immediately flew back because Wisconsin canceled the boys tournament and because my wife asked me to be there. And so when we got back, she got tested. It took a while for that test to come back, but it was negative. But because I started exhibiting a little symptoms, they still thought it could be COVID. And so they were only treating her virtually. And anyone that's listening can fully know You can't diagnose a lung infection that's developing into pneumonia and sepsis over virtual visits.
No.
Any doctor, every doctor I have ever talked to about Elizabeth's case, they're like, oh my God, that's so complex. Autoimmune issues, lupus, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, maybe some fibromyalgia. She was kind of dealing with that, but they just weren't quite sure what. And add pulmonary hypertension on top of that, it's a really complex case. And for her doctor to not see her in person with this complex of a case and this deep of a medical history, I trusted her. All of us going into this trusted the medical establishment because, other than an occasional malpractice here and there, we trust our doctors. They have our best interest in mind. So over the course of those 7 weeks, she would get a little bit better and then get a little bit worse. And because we had an oxygen condenser here in this room, and because we had a pulse oximeter and a blood pressure cuff and all the things that we needed to watch those vitals, where if her oxygen started to dip, all right, we're turning up her oxygen. And we're going to, do these kinds of things that we have been told could work. April 29th. And over the course of that 7 weeks, she'd get better, get a little worse. Get better, but not quite as good, get a little worse. Get a little better, get a little worse. And it's just kind of this step where it was kind of one step forward, 2 steps back almost. So April 29th, at about 3 in the morning, she woke up, started throwing up. And I immediately jump up, start getting some Gatorade, get her some cold, washcloths for her forehead because she's got a slight fever. And finally, after about 2 hours of her throwing up, not even able to keep a sip of Gatorade down, we knew it was time to call the ambulance and get to the hospital. So we called. They came in. One of my former players who works for the fire department was there. And yeah, I love Joey. And took her off. They took her to Memorial here in Colorado Springs, then quickly took her up to UCH up in Aurora because that's where all her doctors were and the best doctors in the state were there. And so it just made sense for her to be up there. She got a COVID test when she went in. It was negative. I got a COVID test. It was negative. And I thought, okay, sweet. 2 fresh negative COVID tests. I know all of her doctors. We know a ton of the nurses. I'll get in. I know they're not letting visitors in, but they'll let me in. Nope. I tried going up levels, and it was always a no, 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 only an imminent case of death, to which, okay, all right, that first night Elizabeth spent in the hospital, she said she thought she was going to choke to death on her own phlegm. Does that count? No. So I started focusing on trying to get awareness about this issue of people being forced into hospital situations, nursing home situations, and being given no visitors. Because anyone with common sense knows, hey, we need people. But if you look at the research is clear. Having a loved one there aids in the healing process. And conversely, way more studies show loneliness and isolation increase mortality. And if the purpose of a hospital is to get people home, to heal them, why are they taking away this critical piece of healing property, if you will? So I have a buddy of mine, a former colleague at Focus, who PR, and he sent a blast out to 750 reporters. My mom flew out from Wisconsin because I was starting to get so many bites around the nation, really around Colorado. It was a little bit outside of Colorado, but it was mainly here in Colorado. And so it was Mother's Day weekend, 2 days before Mother's Day, that my mom was flying in to Denver International Airport. Now, if you're familiar with the Denver area, you know that University of Colorado Hospital is right off I-225, Interstate 225. And 225 is what I take on my way to Denver International Airport. So I can literally see the hospital right there from 225. All right. What's the least harmful thing that I can do? Do I just drive by and drive back without any kind of acknowledgement that, hey, I'm making 2 trips past here? Or do I try and do something special where 2 days before Mother's Day, I bring the boys, we stop and we get gyros from our favorite gyro place, a couple exits before Colfax. We go, we sit in the van, we FaceTime, have dinner together, and then we get out and we wave to her from the van. I thought that would encourage her. Instead, she got really emotional. And whenever she get emotional, her health would dip. And I got a call at 2 a.m. Your wife is bleeding in one of her lungs. We're moving her into the ICU. Don't come up. We think we've isolated it. It's a couple small arteries. Don't come up, was the call a couple hours later. She was in a lot of pain because because of the pulmonary hypertension and because of the blood thinners and because of her meds and everything. They couldn't put her under for a surgery to clean out her lungs. And so they had to give her a local anesthetic, get into that lung and suction out all of those clots. She said it was the most painful thing she's ever experienced in her life. So Sunday, Mother's Day, she's recovering from that. And I am dipping into my bag of tips and tricks of almost 20 years with her, doing all the goofy stuff that I would do over the years to try and get her to smile and get her to laugh and chuckle and try and bring some levity. And when it didn't work, and my wife was someone who never got depressed, ever. She was always an optimist, glasses half full. Kind of annoying when I first got married to her. It really kind of was. But eventually she kind of pulled me over to her side a little bit. So I'm much more balanced now. And when I couldn't get her to smile, our conversation turned to, what if this is the one you don't come home from? And I told her, I said, babe, as hard as it is, I promise you we will be okay. I promise you we will be okay. But I said, if you stick around, you got to stick around for you, not for us. You got to stick around for you. Elizabeth and I rarely fought. Rarely. We had a really good marriage. She was my best friend. I mean, it was a really good relationship. But there were a couple times where I was kind of pushing her to get in shape, get a little bit more in shape. She's really skinny. I was like, we got to start lifting weights, start doing some resistance training, start doing some stretching regularly, start doing some cardio, that kind of stuff. And there was one time where I had annoyed her with that enough that she snapped at me. She was actually right here, right where I'm standing right now. I moved my stand-up desk from my office to my bedroom because my mom's been with me the last 2 months while she gets a ton of renovations done. So I'm normally not up here, but I'm starting to like my desk being up here because I got a south-facing window, sunlight during the day. It's great rather than being in the basement. But she was standing right here. And she snapped at me. She said, you don't think I want to live? And I said, hold on. Time up, babe. I know you want to live, but I really wonder, how much do you want to get better? And it shut her up because she knew I was right. So essentially, when I told her, you got to stick around for you, I was saying, listen, things need to change. So 2 nights later, she had a nurse, because she went in an emergency situation. She didn't take anything other than a phone charger and her phone. It's really all she took. She didn't bring a brush, hairbrush. She didn't bring anything. And so her hair was really matted and kind of knotted up. And a nurse went and bought her a hairbrush, washed her hair, started combing those knots out, brushing those knots out, and started singing over Elizabeth. And she told me the next morning on Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday after Mother's Day. She said, Steve, I went into this trance. I was out of my body. I don't know if I was in heaven, but I wasn't here. But I was just experiencing the love of God in a way that I never have. And it was something transformative. And I'm sticking around for me. She said, I can't put it into words, but I'm sticking around for me. And I said, yes. Because a couple months prior, back in January, this is May, back in January, two dear friends and mentors, they came to me and they said, Steve, we want to run a GoFundMe for Elizabeth. We will get it funded. You come up with exercise equipment, doctors you want to work with, treatments that you can do, whatever, supplements, whatever. You come up with your wish list, we will get it funded. The guys are super connected, really successful. One of them is connected with lots of billionaires in Southeast Asia. I mean, they, and one of them runs a media company, a film company, independent film distributor, as well as independent film documentary director. And so I knew my media background, Steve's media background, and Kay's connections, Steve's connections. I had no doubt that it would have been filled. I was like, all right, game on. So I started nailing down kind of okay, this is what we want. This is what we want, the budget for that. And it was a week later, she was finally good enough that they were talking about sending her home. May 19th, we had a FaceTime call of about 11 minutes at probably about 4 something in the afternoon. And she said on that call, they're going to be releasing me either tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, all right, cool. All right. So we started talking about, what do you want for meals? What do you want for takeout? Who do you want to have come over? Because we want to shower you with love and attention that you've been neglected at a pace that you can accept, because she was still weak. It was probably 35, 40 minutes later that I saw a call on my phone, and it was the hospital. My first thought was, sweet. Details about picking her up tomorrow morning. Or maybe they're releasing her tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it was the hospital calling to say, your wife has gone into cardiac arrest. You need to get up here now. 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 Not when she had bleeding in one of her lungs. Not when we were standing outside the hospital and they could have put her in a full suit and wheeled her out. Put her in a freaking full hazmat suit. Let us hug her. Let us touch her. Let us hang out with her. So I immediately jumped up, looked at my boys, and I said, and my mom was my boys were in the living room. My mom was on the couch. And I looked at my boys and I said, your mother's gone into cardiac arrest. Start praying. I jump up, hop in the vehicle, start driving up to Denver, which is an hour and a half drive. 25 minutes into the drive, I call the hospital and they tell me they're still doing chest compressions. And I knew at that point I wasn't going to see my bride alive again. It was an hour into the drive that I called again, and her doctor, Dr. Todd Bull, who I absolutely adore, told me that she didn't make it. They did everything that they could. Elizabeth fully admitted when she was in there, she would have gone in sooner had they allowed visitation. My questions have always been, if her doctor had seen her in person, would she have lived past May of 2020? I believe with everything in me, yes. Had they allowed visitation, would she still be here? And she'd gone to the hospital sooner. Would she have made it through? Would she still be here? I don't know, because it's now at that 10-year mark. I don't know. But would she have made it through May of 2020? I believe with everything in me, the answer is yes. Had they allowed me in after she went in, thought she was going to choke to death on her own phlegm, would she have come out of the hospital? I believe with everything in me, the answer is yes. Had they allowed my boys to hug their mother, would she have made it out of the hospital alive? I believe yes. And even if everything shook out and she still would have started bleeding in one of her lungs, had they allowed visitation, would those minutes, and it's kind of fuzzy on how many minutes between when Dr. Bull left her room and on May 19th and when the nurse walked in and saw her on all fours gasping for air because she had thrown a blood clot into her lungs, pulmonary embolism. In those minutes, and no alarm going off, would me have been in that, if I had been in that room, would the first sign of something being wrong, I'm immediately pulling a cord, calling a nurse, yelling out there, I think something's wrong. Would that have saved her life? And even if they had let us in there and everything would have still played out the way that it did, we would have had those memories. When I came home and I broke the news to my boys, Caleb, who was 8 at the time, Caleb, who was 13 at the time, immediately jumped up and he's like, I gotta go ride my bike. It's a mover and shaker, much like me. I don't sit still. Matthew just sat there on the couch and he stewed and he stewed. And finally, after about 10, 15 minutes, I put my arm around him and I tapped his chest and I said, what's going on in there, bud? And he said, Dad, I'm equal parts sad, equal parts pissed because the last 3 weeks of my mama's life were stolen from me. It shouldn't have been this way. Hundreds of thousands, likely millions, we don't know the numbers, died alone. Forced isolation between March of 2020 and I had a friend today who just sent me a news report on Instagram about how 2 hospitals in Detroit right now have tightened up visitation because of flu, RSV, COVID, because they're starting to hit that. No. Take the precautions that are necessary. You know, I remember standing outside of a cancer ward and seeing a sign, no children under 12. Okay. But sometimes a mother in a hospital needs their child under 12. They need that love from that child that none of the other kids or the husband can give, and it will encourage them. So immediately afterwards, I created the Never Alone Project, a 501c3 organization. Our mission is to build a community to raise awareness about this issue so that ultimately we can see federal legislative change that protects a patient's right to at least one screened loved one per day with no time limits. If I'm in the hospital, I should be able to spend the night. Hey, listen, in the thick of COVID, if they would have said, you cannot leave this room, I would have stayed in that room. If they would have said, wear a mask, and if we ever catch you without a mask, you're gone, I would have never taken my mask off. I would have paid hospital markup rates for a full hazmat suit. I would have done anything to be with my bride because I saw the power of touch. I saw the power of encouragement. I saw the power of speaking words of life, of casting a vision for our future. I saw that power. And we can't let this happen again. Because it's not just affecting them, it's not just killing patients, it's not just hurting them, it's not just giving them PTSD if they get out. I just today had a conversation with a guy. He's an accountant in Ventura, California. He's 63, I think. I think he's 63, is what he said. He was in the hospital for 4 weeks, ventilated, sedated for 3 of those weeks, never allowed visitation until he was taken out of ICU, put into a regular room. His husband was never allowed to be with him. And he talked about the PTSD of the nightmares from all of those sedatives and having that ventilator down his throat. And he said, he talked about the PTSD and the PTSD that his husband has. And it's not just the families that are hurting. It's not just the patients who have gotten out, who have PTSD, trauma, whatever, medical issues because of mistakes that were made, drugs they were given that they really should have never been given because Big Pharma wanted to make more money off of that than something that cost pennies. Remdesivir. But nurses, especially nurses, are leaving the hospital environment because they are so traumatized over holding up, pardon my French, a fucking iPad while someone was dying. It's wrong. They've left. I've talked to more nurses than I can count who have told me I've left the hospital environment because I was so traumatized from that. Has to change. It has to change.
Just talking about that whole subject, even if it wasn't during COVID, I think anyone in the hospital should have the right to have someone with them all the time, because it is true, as wonderful of doctors and nurses that we have, they're still human, and you need someone there, not only for companionship and for comfort, but you need someone there watching and making sure they're not giving you something you're allergic to, or,
Exactly.
not giving you a treatment you don't want. I come from the natural medicine side, and seriously, I don't use a lot of, Western medicine drugs, and I would be very upset if I woke up and found out that I was drugged to death with things that I don't believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I had a conversation last year, a couple conversations with Dr. Denis Cortese. Dr. Cortese worked, I believe, 40 plus years at Mayo Clinic. And he finished as the president and CEO of the whole damn thing. So, in my opinion, world-class doctor and without peer hospital administrator. I mean, you can maybe make a case for Johns Hopkins or Cedars-Sinai or Cleveland Clinic, whatever. No, Mayo Clinic is the king of the hill. They are at the top of the heap, and they have been for a long time. And he told me, he said, Steve, he agrees with me and he's willing to testify in DC should it ever come. he said, and this is a guy who advised Bill and Hillary in the Oval Office. This is a guy who he advised Rahm Emanuel and Barack Obama in the Oval Office about healthcare policy. He's he, as far as I can tell, I think he's a Democrat because he wasn't advising anyone else. We never really talked politics, but as far as I can tell, yeah. But he tells me on this one, and because the reason I bring up Democrat, I'm unaffiliated. I've been unaffiliated for 20 years. I see both parties as corrupt as all get out. But the reason I bring up a party in this situation is because all of my, I shouldn't say all, I've had one, maybe two legislators, Republicans who have opposed this. All of the opposition is Democrats. And I grew up in the 80s. I was 6 years old in 1980. And I always thought the Democrats were about the little guy. I always thought the Democrats were about the working man and the underrepresented and, you know, the people who were up against big corporate interests. I found out quickly, and I've learned that in the 90s, I believe it was, Bill Clinton started to kind of change things where, okay, we can take donations from corporate interests, but they're corporate interests that are in our interest. And one that you would think have our best interest in mind is hospital association, big pharma, all of that. So that's where the money is coming in, and that's why I'm getting opposed. But Dr. Cortese gave me a handful of examples of hospitals around the nation that were doing it right. They were still letting visitors in. They were still doing all of the elective stuff because they saw with swine flu, with bird flu, with SARS, with MERS, with Ebola, with Zika, with West Nile, all of those, they saw a potential Spanish flu happening and they created a specific quarantine ward. So that way, all of the quarantine patients would be there and the rest of the hospital could go around business as usual. It's the way it should be. It's the way it should be. And it's sad that in this fight, I've got the hospital association, the doctors association, the nurses association, all opposing this kind of legislation. Meanwhile, 85+% of nurses believe that visitors should be allowed in. Meanwhile, a vast majority of doctors that I have talked to, even interacted with on LinkedIn and social media, agree that visitors should have been allowed in. Yet the Nurses Association, the Hospital Association are opposing this every step of the way. Hospital Association, I get. Hospital Association, their interest is in the best interest of the hospital as an organization. And what they are concerned about, one of their concerns, is that virus du jour spreading amongst their staff and being understaffed. And I get that to a point. Yet the studies show it doesn't really happen like that. Doctors that quarantined themselves in the hospital or quarantined themselves at home when they went home, they got it, if I remember right, at a less rate or an equal rate.
So why are the organizations and associations who are supposed to represent doctors and nurses, why are they opposed?
I would think, this is just me as a layman and talking with people that I know that are in the political sphere. The people that go to work at those kinds of organizations, they lean left. And so it's about the collective more than it is the individual, which is one of the key talking points of socialism and communism, that the good of the many outweighs the needs of the one, which I totally get. I totally get. Yet at the same time, we have to balance. As soon as Elizabeth got in the hospital, every media appearance, all I said was, can't we balance the need to protect doctors, nurses, staff, and other patients? And I get that because my wife is one of those other patients. And I have friends that are nurses and friends that are doctors.
Mhm.
I get the need to protect them. We do need to tighten this up. But can't we balance that with giving the individual the love and attention they need? So one screen loved one per day, no time limits. That's all I ever asked. That's all I ever asked.
So, with your organization, how can people help? What are you specifically doing, and how can people help?
Yeah. So we right now this year we are working in 3 states in particular, trying to get legislation. Wisconsin. I'm driving my mom back to Wisconsin in a week and a half or 2.5 weeks, not quite sure. And I'm going to be hopefully meeting with State Senator Andre Jacques. He's up in Green Bay, the Green Bay area. And he introduced legislation last year that didn't make it out, made it out of the Senate, passed the Senate, but didn't make it through the House to Governor Evers' desk. So he's trying again. So we're working with a couple other organizations to try and drum up lots of people to show up and testify. We're working in California. California, obviously, as California goes, the rest of the nation goes. And last year, amazingly, there was a state representative, Gallagher, who introduced legislation that passed the House, passed the Senate, and Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed it. If you're in California, Gavin Newsom wants you to die alone. That's the only way I can say it. Everything going on with the fires, I don't know. I don't know who's responsible for the mess that is. But I do know if someone dies alone in a hospital that a loved one wanted to be in there, that's Gavin Newsom's fault. And then we're trying again in Mississippi. Mississippi also had legislation that didn't make it across the finish line. And so we're trying, and again, so we're trying in a blue state, California, a purple state, Wisconsin, and a red state in Mississippi. And right now there's, I believe, 14 states that have legislation. If you go to neveraloneproject.org, click on the legislation and studies tab, you'll see those states. I haven't updated Ohio yet. I haven't had a chance to look at that legislation. But I just got an email last week, I think it was, a few days ago, from one of my people on my email list that Ohio now has legislation. So hopefully good for Ohio, because one of the things that we have found in this is not all legislation is equal. Just because you have legislation doesn't mean it's good. West Virginia, unless you are on your deathbed, they allow one visit every 5 days. Florida, Governor Gavin Newsom had this big group of people behind him, and he did this big public signing. We have no patient left, that made national news. We have no patient left alone legislation. All it guarantees is a daily 2-hour visit. I have a friend, her elderly aunt is up in Greeley, which is northeast of Denver. And her aunt, being in the hospital, her cousin, the daughter, is a registered nurse. And the daughter would go in and she'd say, my mom is dehydrated. She has bed sores. She's starting to develop bed sores, this, that, and the other. She'd go back the next day for her 1-hour visit. She'd say, my mom is still dehydrated. The bed sores are starting to get worse, this, that, and the other. We need to be in there, the ability to be in there 24/7 to be able to get this done. And so, so Florida, not great. It's a start, but it's not great because only 2 hours. In Wisconsin, in March of 2023, my dad, who turned 80 last December, he passed away May 8th, but my 79-year-old, I think dad was 78 or 79 at the time, got hospitalized with COVID in the hospital that I was born in, Portage, Wisconsin. divine savior. Locals call it divine failure. Dad gets hospitalized with COVID. All they wanted to give my mom was a daily 10-minute visit. That's it. She had to get into a full suit. 10 minutes was all. Needless to say, I kept working my way up through corporate structure, the hospital structure, and then ended up getting to corporate. And corporate gave me an exception. And I said, well, what about everyone else? What about everyone else who hasn't been on major media appearances and stuff like that? Babylon B, Candace Owens, NBC, CBS. So, and then Texas. Texas has legislation, but a doctor can override visitation. And we all know, anyone that works in a hospital environment knows, all it takes is an edict from on high, the administration, to say no visitation under penalty of your hours being cut and your patients being cut. And I have a friend. I just created a podcast called Every Patient's Right: Ending Isolation in Healthcare, a podcast of the Never Alone Project. Leaned on my 27 plus years of working in media. I have an audio production company. I'm like, I just got to do this. I got to do this to try and help this get across the finish line and help to try and get some momentum again in DC. Get it across the finish line in California, Mississippi, Wisconsin, any other states. And I talked with Gail Seiler. In fact, it should probably be up the end of January. Gail got hospitalized with COVID. Her husband was an RN. And he was managing her at home. And finally, when it got to the point where she was where he felt she needed to be hospitalized, he took her to the hospital. No visitation whatsoever. And this, I still find this hard to wrap my mind around. But as soon as her doctor checked her in, he asked about her vaccination status. No, I haven't been vaccinated. He said, oh, that's too bad, Mrs. Seiler, because you're going to die. She went days without 7 days, if I remember right, without any water. No ice chips, no nothing, only IV fluids. She went 11 or 12 days without food. All because the doctor overrode, as punishment for her not being vaccinated, no visitation. So if you go search for Never Alone Project on your favorite podcast app, Every Patient's Right: Ending Isolation in Healthcare, you can subscribe, share, all of that. Another way that they can help is through donations, monthly donors. $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month. If you want it to go towards the podcast, if you like the podcast, you think we're doing a good job, help support the podcast, because I want to take it from every other week. I'm paying it out of my own pocket, paying my editors out of my own pocket to get this done. I'd like to start to do video. I've got the video recorded, but I want to get it edited, thrown up on YouTube, because YouTube is the second largest search engine out there. I want to get clips made for social media and YouTube shorts. And if TikTok's still around, I don't know. There's a question about whether it's going to be around next week.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to get clips out there so that way we can help to spread the word and we can get stories. Because the reason I do this is I never want to go through that kind of pain ever again. I've heard too many stories of someone in a car accident or a motorcycle accident, asymptomatic with COVID. They test positive. Maybe they don't have COVID and it's a false positive, but all of a sudden, no visitation. I don't want to be in that kind of situation ever again.
So, do you have any advice at all if, hospitals have these rules and, like you said, sometimes you were going up the chain of command and you were still not getting in any advice at all on a family member trying to see their family member that's in the hospital? about who to talk to or how maybe to get around that in certain situations?
Yeah. Yeah. Be nice. Never yell at someone. Never cuss them out. Never, as frustrated as you are, I know it. I know it. I know it. My God, there were so many times when Elizabeth was in the hospital, I thought I am going to get some hidden cameras and I'm going to go in, I'm going to barge in, I'm going to try and get up to my wife's room and get arrested if necessary and use this as something to potentially go viral. But I knew that would do nothing but stress her out. And my number one concern was getting her home. So be nice. Tell your story to every single person, how much this person means to you, how much you love them, show the emotion. I guarantee you there are nurses. I've heard so many stories of nurses sneaking family members in through a side door. I've heard it so many times. I have a friend, when Elizabeth was in the hospital, when she was still alive in May of 2020, a friend of mine who we used to go to church with, she and a colleague had a patient who they didn't think was going to make it through the night. So they snuck the daughter in through the side. Mom recovered and ended up going home. That's the power of having someone there. That's the power. So keep telling your story. Someone may let you in. I think if I remember correctly, I think in Gail's case, her husband did get in at one point. They let him go up to the room to deliver some stuff. And they wouldn't let her into the ICU, wouldn't let him into the ICU to be with her. But he said, waved, encouraged her, cheered her on because someone was nice and let him at least go up and see her. But it's not really going on right now. Much that I can tell. That I thought things had, everyone that I've talked to in the hospital environment says things are nearly back to where they were in 2019, which was people being able to spend the night, the closest family members being able to spend the night, help them out, that kind of stuff. When my dad was in the hospital with kidney problems and heart failure a year ago, we couldn't spend the night. But we did have some nurses that were, visiting hours are supposed to be over, but you can go ahead and stay another hour or two. You're not causing any trouble. You're not out walking around. Just stay here in the room. Be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you stay here.
Mm-hmm.
So
fine. Yeah. So can you just repeat one more time, your website? That's probably the best place for people to connect with you.
neveraloneproject.org. neveraloneproject.org. And there we've got the podcast tab. We've got legislation and studies. So if your state does not have legislation, you can print out a bunch of those studies, take it to your state representative, take it to your state senator, take it to your United States senator or congressman if you have access, and do what you can to try and get this in your state. And let us know if you're one of our citizen advocates, because I have connections to other groups who will definitely show up in support of this legislation, because we have victims all around the nation. And I'm tied with a couple really good groups that have a number of people, and we can get hopefully dozens of people to show up and testify, which helps. And then it helps to contact your local NPR station and contact your local TV stations and let them know about this legislation and tell them about your story. And if they get cameras in that room, I know from personal experience, the Democrats who are going to vote no are more likely to vote yes. Mm-hmm. I know it from personal experience because I had a number of them that very first year in 2020 that voted yes when the camera was there in committee and voted no on the floor. Mm-hmm. So let's do this. Let's get this done because no one should die alone.
Right. So we're coming to the end here. I have a couple personal questions for you.
Yeah.
What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
My boys in the mountains of Colorado
Mhm.
and my friends, my network. I'm a member of a private cigar club called Holy Smokes. We have 5,000 plus members around the world. I can go to a whole bunch of cities. I can go to San Francisco. I can go to Seattle. I can go to Southern California. I can go to Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth, Tampa, Orlando, Charlotte, DC, New York. And I got a place to stay because I've got these friends
Mhm.
through Holy Smokes. And so, yeah, my boys, nature, and my buddies.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing this and,
Thank you, Kimberly.
making people aware and, anyone, if you have a story, if you have something that you can share to help with this, I don't think it's hard for me to believe there's anybody against this legislation because it's just common sense that we need loved ones around us when we're not feeling well.
Colorado State Senator Kyle Mullica, when he's not in session, he's a trauma nurse. He's very opposed to this. And he had the audacity. After it got shot down one year in committee, afterwards, we were all kind of congregating out in the hall. And I kind of cornered him a little bit. And I said, what can we do? How can we get this done?
Mhm.
I said, sorry, Steve, there's nothing we can do. And all the time, he's munching on peanut M&Ms and clearly 100+ pounds overweight. Dude, come on, take better care of yourself. Then you won't have to worry about closing off visitation because you're worried about some virus. The people that were dying had comorbidities. Man, yeah.
Well, I have one more question before we complete.
Yes.
What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
When Dr. Oh, shoot, I'm forgetting his name. I'm spacing his name. The head of pulmonology at University of Colorado Hospital. Anyway, the head of pulmonology came to me and he said, Steve, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but there's a real possibility your wife won't be around to see your youngest graduate high school. I went into shock. I went numb because after the emergency C-section with Matthew, I thought this could be my journey. And it was at that point I knew it was going to be, barring a miracle, it was going to be my journey. It took me a couple of days to recover from that. And once I did, it was like an epiphany happened in my life. It was almost like an enlightenment experience. I made the determination every night when I would go to bed, I would mentally go through my day and I would ask myself, did I love my wife to the best of my ability today? And if I didn't, all right, what can I do differently tomorrow to make it better? And I would do it occasionally for the boys, but I would do it just about every night with Elizabeth because I knew how quickly things could change with her health. We don't know how much more time each of us have, our loved ones have here on this planet. We don't know how much time we have left on this planet. And if you could go to bed every night and ask yourself, just mentally go through your day, did I love my spouse? Did I love my partner? Did I love my kids? Did I love my parents? Did I love my siblings? Did I love those people that are closest to me to the best of my ability? And if not, make it better. If we all do that, this world is going to be a much better place to live. I promise. I really promise.
Mhm. I totally agree. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Talk to you again soon.